Hey guys, April Melvin here, and we are finishing up. We are wrapping up the series about spiritual battles. We're looking now at spiritual battles involving people who are being mean. You dealt with this? Well, then today we're going to talk about how to handle it. All right, before we get into the meat of the video, I want to take just a quick sec and ask that you guys please consider subscribing to my channel. I put out new content every week, and they are Christian faith-based. So we're going to be talking about things that I'm going through, studies that I'm doing, just different topics that impact our Christian walk. If that sounds like something that interests you guys, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like and a share if this was helpful. Okay, so we're wrapping up spiritual battles, and I really wanted to get into the weeds with this. I think a lot of times when we talk about spiritual battles, we sort of talk about it from this 30,000 foot view. And, the challenge with that is that we don't really talk about, okay, how to implement the armor of God to be overcomers in spiritual battles. And so I hope that's what I tried to do in this series. We looked at circumstances, we looked at people, and now we're wrapping up with spiritual battles involving people when people are being mean. And I'm going to say this again in the last two videos, and I really do believe that this is the majority of the spiritual battles involving people that we face, right? It's a combination of some assumptions on our part and some missed expectations. Whether it's just a mixed expectation that we have for somebody or an assumption or a combination of the two, I really think that's the majority of our spiritual battles involving people. But there are times when people are just being mean. And honestly, the 3 steps that I'm going to outline here, you can use regardless of whether they're just being mean or whether it truly is a missed expectation. So these can be a universal step process here, but it's particularly important to use these when people are just being mean. And they might be behaving that way because they're jealous, or maybe they're intimidated, or maybe you did something to them and they're holding on to it. So there's bitterness. There's a lot of reasons why someone could lash out and behave in a hateful way. But these steps are going to show you how you can overcome that, because again, you're not responsible for what they do, but you are responsible for how you respond. And I've got 3 steps that I think are going to help tremendously. All right, step number 1, practice the pause. And I'm going to lean on a good old Proverbs verse. This is one of my favorite verses from Proverbs, and one I probably should have tattooed on my forehead. But this is Proverbs 29:11. It says, "Fools vent their anger, but the wise quietly hold it back." And, guys, in that moment when either someone has actually done something mean, or we're perceiving that their actions are mean, it's so easy to just want to vent. And I am so guilty about this. I want to immediately jump in. I want to immediately handle the situation. But I would encourage you to practice the pause. This is something that God's really been dealing with me about this year, taking that step back in that moment instead of just immediately responding to the situation. So important to do. But this pause is a pause. It's not a rest. There are some things that you need to be doing during this pause. 2 things, actually. The first is get on your knees. Pray. Guys, prayer is our most powerful weapon in these moments, and it is one of our most underutilized weapons. So when you're faced with a situation and someone has done something to you, right, your best way to handle it is to get in prayer. Now, when you pray, don't just pray at God, pray to God. Here's what I mean about that. So often when we go to God, especially when we go about these prayers, we just vent, right? We just talk about how wrong we have, been done, and, all of the different things that the other person is doing. And, we spend our time in prayer just talking about the problem instead of going to God and asking for the solution. And guys, I know that this is the antithesis of what some of us believe, but God really can speak to us. He does speak to his people, right? The word says that his sheep know his voice. We know his voice. But in order to hear his voice, we need to be quiet. So when you pray, pray and then stop and listen. Guys, I can't tell you the number of things that God has dropped in my spirit when I was quiet enough to receive them. And so I would encourage you in the pause to get in prayer and to spend that time asking God what you should be doing about the situation, how you should be responding and behaving, and then be quiet. Listen. Promise you, you will hear something from him. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is find somebody that you can get godly counsel from. So often, again, we see, fools vent their anger, right? We want to go to our BFF and we want to just spill everything and hear that this person was horrible and that you're awesome, right? That's our knee-jerk reaction as people. But guys, find that godly counsel to sit down with you and say, okay, you might want to look at it like this, or what does the word say, or have you considered this scripture, right? Bringing us back to that kingdom message is so important in these moments. That disunity that can be caused from anger and hate, guys, that's what the enemy wants. That's the spiritual battle. So we need to be cautious to not respond in the way that the enemy wants, because then he wins. And so having a friend that loves you enough to gently and kindly remind you of what the gospel says about our response is so important. In fact, a dear friend did this to me the other day. She totally Mr. Miyagi'd me and it worked, right? But had I not gone to her, if I had gone to someone else who is more likely to pour gasoline on, or spiritual gasoline on my anger, right? Who knows where I would have been. So I encourage you to find that person that can bring you back to what the word says. So practice the pause, but in that pause, seek God's counsel and seek other godly counsel to help guide and direct you. All right, step number 2, communicate. And guys, I know that for a lot of us, this is going to be the hardest one, but truly, let me encourage you, communication is your best tool in this moment. Go to that other person and just talk to them. Again, after you've practiced your pause, after you've prayed, after you've sought godly counsel, honestly, after you've calmed down a little bit, the best thing that you can do is go to that other person in love and just talk through it. The enemy doesn't want that. And so part of the victory he gets in these spiritual battles is by continuing that division and that strife, because that's what he wants. He wants us divided. He wants us angry at each other, right? You can't effectively spread the gospel if you can't forge relationships. Or, when a relationship breaks, it makes it that much more difficult to then be that light in that person's life. And so the enemy wants that discord. He wants that anger. He wants that continued bitterness and frustration. You solve that by communicating. By opening up, by being honest and vulnerable with other people. Every single one of us is going to make mistakes. Every single one of us is going to mess up. But when we go to that other person in love and just explain how we feel, it just clears the air. Guys, remember, Satan is the father of lies. He works in darkness to manipulate us and get us to think things and believe things that aren't true. And the only combat that we have to that is the truth. It's spreading that light, being open and honest with one another. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's challenging. And I'm going to be honest with you. You're not always going to get the outcome that you want, but don't allow a bad outcome or the fear of a bad outcome keep you from talking and being open with others. That is so critical. So after you've paused, then go to that other person in love and talk to them. All right, third step here, and that is to let it go. And guys, this is so important. And honestly, it is independent of the other 2 steps. Even if you don't pause, and even if you don't communicate to that person, guys, you still gotta let some stuff go. Holding on to that stuff, that's what creates bitterness in a believer's life. And that is something that can cause tremendous damage, not just to the other person, but most importantly to you. Hanging on to that bitterness, that changes your heart. And so, guys, regardless of what someone does to you, the reason why we need to walk in forgiveness in love partly is because not doing that changes who we are. It hardens our hearts. And so when someone does something to us, whether it's mean, intentionally or unintentionally, just be mindful to let it go. When those thoughts come in, well, this person, you got to take control of that thought. You got to take that thought captive and you got to release it. I have forgiven that. I have let that go. I'm not picking that back up again. I'm not picking that scab, right? We have to do that. Now, here's what it doesn't mean, right? Because I think that Christians get this wrong. We are people that swing to extremes, right? We either hang on to everything or we let go of everything and we fall right back into the same traps. And so I want to encourage you, being a believer and walking in forgiveness and walking in love does not mean that you are a doormat. If someone has intentionally hurt you, do not put yourself into that situation. You still have to love them. You still have to forgive them. You still got to let it go, but don't touch the hot stove again, right? Set up those boundaries. I have had to do this a lot in my life. You don't have to announce the boundary. In fact, please don't announce the boundary, right? But just be mindful. If you find yourself in a situation, for instance, and every time you engage with this person in this particular manner, it creates this situation, stop engaging with that person in that manner, right? You don't have to do that. You can still love the other person and create those loving boundaries. And that is so important, not just for you, but for them. You are responsible for how you respond and what situations you put yourself in. And so if you find yourself, dealing with an individual that is abusive in some way, don't open yourself up for that abuse. And just because you've set that boundary, that doesn't mean you're not being Christ-like. It doesn't mean that you don't love them. It means that you do love them. You just recognize that that's a situation that you shouldn't put yourself in. So absolutely practice the pause, absolutely communicate with the other person, but don't forget to let it go. Once you have recognized what it is, let it go. Just don't allow it to continue to permeate your thoughts and your mind, and set up those boundaries. If you see that this is an ongoing situation, or if this is something that's going to continue, or maybe you've communicated with that person and that person feels very differently about the situation, it is okay to set a boundary and not put yourself in that position again. Don't touch the hot stove, right, guys? That third step, it's one that we think that we're doing, but we don't actually do, because we don't do that final step of capturing our thoughts and releasing them when those things start to come back up. We need to be transforming and renewing our mind. And part of that process is recognizing and reflecting and taking control of our thoughts and emotions. So do that in these situations. This is the third, final, and I think probably most important step. All right, guys, that wraps up the Spiritual Battle series. Again, I hope that this was helpful for you guys. I have to say that a lot of the stuff that I talked about were things that God has dealt very heavily with me this last year, and particularly in this last video, practicing the pause. That's the one that I struggle with. So let me know, if you would, in the comment section, which of the steps that you struggle with. I want to get it done kind of person, and that's not always the best strategy. Having that time of pause is very important for me. So let me know in the comment section what you guys think. And then if you want to hang out with me some more, you can join my Facebook group, Mighty Mamas. In it, we just do daily devotions. We share Jesus memes and fun, inspirational things throughout our day. I really just wanted to clean up my Facebook feed and put more Jesus in it. So that's what the group is all about. If that sounds like something that's interests you, then please feel free to join it. I'll put the link in the description below. And then come back next week. I'm going to put a video out next Wednesday. Still trying to figure out what I want to talk about. So stay tuned, and I will see you next week.